All right, what's going on, everyone? So today we've got a special kind of tier list. It's not just a tier list, it's more of like a reaction critique tier list because a couple weeks ago, Charlie Penguin0 Moist Critical uploaded a Bible tier list, and after watching it, I was sorely disappointed in his Sunday school knowledge and figured that as somebody who attended Sunday school pretty much every Sunday up until I got a job when I was 18 and then I didn't have to anymore. I figured I would step in and put in my 2 cents. I'm obviously not going to react to the whole video. It's like an hour and a half long. But I am going to put his tier list sort of up in one of these corners somewhere here. And then I'm going to do my own tier list and end up comparing the two. If you haven't seen his video, I would definitely recommend watching it. I'll link it at the top of the description below because I'm definitely going to be referencing some of the things. Other than that, let's just jump into it. So the first two are, these are easy. These are essentially just the two forces of good and evil. And I'm also not trying to face any kind of divine retribution from putting there anywhere else. I don't want to get smote while I'm sitting here recording this. Other than the two easiest ones, okay. So here we have Adam and Eve. Now let's do Eve first. Oh yeah, some of you might have noticed I reworked the order these were in down here to be more or less chronological. So Eve. Now I'm going to put Eve in bad. Because Eve sort of caused the entire downfall of all of humanity. Now, the only thing that's keeping Eve out of real bad is I do pity her. She was one of the first two humans, so there wasn't exactly precedence or cliches for her to figure out that she shouldn't be listening to a talking snake. So that's the only thing that's keeping her out of real bad right now. I mean, causing the downfall of humanity it's pretty serious. Adam, I'm going to put in meh. Now, normally I would put him in bad for doing pretty much the same exact thing, but he does get some credit in that the only reason he did it was he decided that he wanted to go down with Eve and he wanted to just go down alone. So I will give him credit for that, even though he definitely should have known better. Abel, the firstborn son of Adam and Eve, I'm going to put Abel in meh because he doesn't really do much. Now, to his credit, he didn't exactly get the chance to do much. He was kind of murdered before he could really do anything. Now Cain, the one who actually murdered Abel, I'm going to put down in real bad. Nah, I'll put him in regular bad. Now, Charlie put him in best of the best as credit for committing the first murder. But what they don't mention is that he commits the first murder for the shittiest reason. Literally, the only reason Cain kills Abel is because he has some serious inferiority complex. And of all the reasons to murder somebody, that's gotta be at like the bottom of the list. Completely invalidating the entire credit for getting the first murder. After Cain, we have Noah. I'm gonna be honest, I'm gonna put Noah in meh. It's cool that he built a giant boat, but other than that, he doesn't really do much. He builds a giant boat, he gathers every animal, and then he rides the boat for 40 days and 40 nights with his family. Abraham, I'm gonna have to agree with them and put Abraham down in real bad. Because even though Abraham sacrificing Isaac was a test, and even though it was kind of normal to hear the voice of God telling you to do things back then, Abraham does a lot of weird shit. So, if I recall correctly, in one story, Abraham and his wife Sarah, Sarah can move into, I'm going to put Sarah in meh because she doesn't really do much, but Abraham and Sarah are both like wandering and they come across, I guess just on their travels, they end up in a city and like the city lord or something brings them in and decides to show them hospitality. And so the city lord sees Sarah and he's like, wow, she's really gorgeous. And he asks Abraham who she is to him. And Abraham looks this man in the eye and says, oh, that's my sister. And so obviously the city lord starts hitting on Sarah like crazy. And like 2-3 days later or something, when they're about to leave, Abraham's like, oh, by the way, that was my wife the whole time. What the fuck? Right? So naturally, the city lord has the exact same reaction. To his credit, he's not a piece of shit. A lot of kings would have just killed the husband back then. But the city lord was like, dude, what the fuck? Why wouldn't you tell me that at the beginning? I'm also not sure, but I think that same thing might have actually happened more than once, like in different cities, but that one I'm not as concrete about. I know it happened at least once. On to Lot. Lot. No, I want to put Lot in real bad. Because Lot's a total fucking loser. Right? Despite the fact that he was supposed to be like the only righteous person left in Sodom and Gomorrah. When the angry mob came to his door and wanted to do unsavory things to the angels, he was like, no, don't do unsavory things to my guests. Take my daughters instead. What the fuck, dude? That doesn't make any sense. Now that enough is to put him in real bad. But I will give him bad out of sheer pity. Because for those of you that don't know, later on in his life, after they escaped the city, Lot's wife had died because the angels essentially told them when they left the city, don't turn around and look back under any circumstance. And she, of course, did the one thing she was not supposed to do. And she got transmogrified into a literal pillar of salt. So Lot now has no wife and 2 daughters. And so they're living on their own, and Lot gets super fucking old. And his daughters come up with the ingenious idea that, hey, we need to carry on the bloodline somehow. So, instead of just going out and finding husbands like fucking normal people, I'm gonna put a trigger warning here. We're gonna get into a pretty gross ass topic for anybody who doesn't like that kind of thing. But so his daughters come up with the ingenious idea to get him blackout drunk and have him impregnate both of them. What the fuck? How does that even cross your mind? Like, even among the bad shit that happens in the Bible, that's crazy. I feel so bad for Lot. I mean, I think both of their lineages, like, I think the children that his daughters had ended up giving birth to, like, I think they gave birth to, like, cursed lineages as a result. But still, that was still fucked up. Now we're on to Isaac. Isaac's just going to get meh. He doesn't really do much other than get finessed out of his blessing by Jacob and Rebekah. Rebekah, who's next, gets bad along with Jacob. Esau, let's talk about Esau first. I'm going to put Esau in meh because he doesn't really do anything. Literally all we know about him is that he was the firstborn son of Isaac, and he hunted, and he was really hairy. Those are the only 3 things we're ever told about him. And he doesn't get to do much because the story chooses to focus on Jacob a lot more. So essentially, Esau was the firstborn son of Isaac, and as such, he's entitled to his blessing. I don't know exactly what that does, but it does something. So essentially, Isaac was getting really old and was about to die. Now, Esau should have received his blessing any day now, but Rebekah, Isaac's wife, favors Jacob as her favorite child, and so her and Jacob hatch this little plan where Jacob's going to cover himself in, like, animal fur to emulate Esau's hair, and then cook some meat stew and give it to Isaac and trick Isaac into giving him Esau's blessing. Now, fortunately for them, Isaac was super old, super decrepit at this point, so he's basically blind. And so Jacob goes to him, and he's like, Dad, it's me, Esau. Give me your blessing. And Isaac actually falls for it and gives him his blessing, and Esau just gets completely cucked, and I feel so bad for him. I mean, Jacob does get some credit for fathering the 12 tribes of Israel, and he did wrestle with an angel, which was pretty cool, but I mean, he ultimately lost that fight, obviously. and you can't really come back from finessing your one and only brother like that. That's so fucked up. Joseph. This is another flaw with Jacob. Jacob had severe favoritism problems. And that manifests the most in Joseph. Now, Joseph gets God tier because Joseph himself was amazing. For those of you that don't know, long story short, Joseph was Jacob's favorite child. His other 11 brothers, or well, 10 of them, I don't think the 12th one was born yet. His other 10 brothers hated that. And so they conspire to get Joseph sold into slavery. And then they just tell Jacob that Joseph died. And then Joseph he gets enslaved, but he ends up, I forget that it's not important who he gets sold as a slave to. But eventually, through sheer merit alone, Joseph ends up rising up to be, oh, that's right, I think he interprets the Pharaoh's dream, the Pharaoh at the time. I think he interprets his dream. And then he ends up getting raised up to be the vizier, who's like the second in command in Egypt, and he helps them like overhaul their agriculture so that they can survive some horrible famine. So Joseph's going to be our first human god tier up here. Laban, completely irrelevant. I literally had to look up what he did before I made this video, and I already forgot about it because he doesn't do like anything. Pharaoh gets real bad. Because this Pharaoh, I assume this is talking about the Pharaoh of Moses' time, who enslaved like the entirety of the Israelites and also treated them like absolute dog shit. He gets an obvious real bad. Moses, I mean, I'll give Moses a good. I would put him higher, but like, Moses also does some dumb shit. He gets kicked out of the promised land because this is another thing Charlie talks about in his video, but he gets the story a little bit wrong. He correlates him hitting the rock with the out of rage with the story of the golden calf. But the golden calf is a completely different story, and in that story, it's the tablets that the 10 Commandments are written on that he breaks. The rock story is significantly lamer. Essentially, the Israelites are complaining because they've been wandering through the desert and they're running out of water. So Moses hits up God and he's like, hey, I need some more water. And so God tells him, he's like, hey, go over to that rock and talk to it. Now, despite the fact that at this point, God had split a sea in half, drowned the entirety of the Egyptian army, and also after casting, 10, 12 plagues on them, despite all the shit that Moses has seen God do, I mean, it literally, for their food source while the Israelites are walking through the desert, God makes it rain bread. Despite all of that, Moses is like, no, talking to a rock is where I draw the line. And so he swings his staff at the rock instead. Now, obviously, the Israelites do need water, so the Lord causes the rock to gush water anyway. But it's Moses' punishment. He's not allowed to enter the promised land. Let's move on to Aaron. Aaron doesn't do much. And so I would normally put him in meh. But I think I'm going to put him in bad for being kind of a pushover. Because this goes back to the golden calf story. Moses leaves. He goes up, I think, Mount Sinai? One of the mountains in the desert to talk to God and receive the 10 Commandments. And during that time, the Israelites are like, oh, Moses has been gone for a week. Clearly, God has abandoned us. Let's make a new God that we can actually see. And Aaron just goes with it, despite the fact that he's Moses' brother and supposed to be his right-hand man. So Aaron actually goes along with the whole golden calf plan, which ultimately ends up terribly. Next is Joshua. Joshua gets best of the best. Joshua is super cool. He marched around. He led the army to march around. I think, yeah, because he led the Israelites after Moses. And he marched around Jericho and dropped all of Jericho. But beyond that, I don't think he does much. I mean, the story of Jericho is crazy, bringing down entire walls, Attack on Titan style. But other than that, he doesn't do much after that or before that. Rahab gets a good. Rahab is super awesome. She's linked to Joshua's story. So essentially, before they took down Jericho, they went in to spy on it. And they were about to get caught. And so they hid in Rahab's house. And Rahab found them, but decided not to rat them out to the guards. And as a reward, I think she was given a cloth or something. And they were like, tie this around your door, so that when we take the whole city, your house will be left completely untouched. And she did, and her house was fine. Deborah, I'm gonna put her in good. I don't remember much about her. I think she was the first female judge back when there were like I think there were 12 judges in the book of Judges, but not all of them are super relevant. But I'm putting Deborah in good because I think she's the one that drove the stake through the guy's head. There was some like evil general or king or something, and they were like in the same tent or something, and he went to bed, and she took a stake from the tent and just like drove it through his skull. I'm pretty sure that was Deborah, and that was pretty fucking metal. Gideon, easy best of the best. This was 300 before 300, except Gideon actually won. He took 300 men against, what was it, the Mennonites, something, one of Israel's enemies. And he wanted to bring like some huge army, but God basically gave him a bunch of qualifications that ended up bringing the army down to like 300 people. But then they like snuck into the camp, performed a sneak attack, confused the enemy so bad that the enemy starts killing each other, and they ended up actually winning. Samson. Let's talk about Samson for a minute. Charlie put Samson in God tier. And I do not fuck with that. I'm putting Samson all the way down in bad. Because here's the thing about Samson. Samson was so dumb. So a lot of people know about Samson's strength and how it was linked to his hair, but a lot of people don't know that it wasn't technically his hair. So Samson took what was called, I think it was the Nazarite vow, which was essentially like, don't touch grapes, don't touch dead things, and don't cut your hair. Now, throughout his life, he broke the first two of those. So the only one remaining was his hair. And his vow was what gave him super strength. So the moment he broke the final part of the vow and got his haircut was when he lost his strength. The problem is how he got his haircut. Delilah. So there's this girl, Delilah, in the Philistine cities that Samson falls in love with, and they get married or start dating or whatever. And essentially, she tries to make him lose his strength like 3 times. The first couple times, she's like, oh, hey, by the way, just out of curiosity, what's your weakness? And at first, Samson's just totally messing with her. I forget what he tells her to do the first time. He gives her some weird task. I think oh, that's right. He's like, get this special kind of rope and tie me up, and that'll remove all my super strength. So naturally, she does that while he's sleeping. And then she sells him out to the Philistines. And so the Philistines storm in, ready to capture him because they think he's powerless. And so naturally, he just snaps the ropes and kills them all. So he knew, from the beginning, he knew exactly what this bitch was trying to do. But he lets her keep doing it because she does it again. The second time, I think he tells her to like braid his hair a certain way, getting awfully close there. She does, but it doesn't work. And then finally, for some fucking reason, she puts on like the crocodile tears and she's like, oh, do you not trust me? Why won't you tell me your real weakness? And he tells her, he's like, fine, yeah, cut my hair and I'll lose all my power. And so he gets kidnapped. He gets kidnapped and they gouge his eyes out and they like tie him to 2 pillars. That's actually what this picture is. They tie him to 2 pillars and just start making fun of him at like a party. And normally I would put him in real bad for being that big of an idiot. But I will bump him up to bad because his last moments were pretty cool. In his last moments, he essentially, he prayed and he was like, God, can I have a little bit more strength this one time, please? I'm sorry. And the Lord takes pity on him and gives him strength. And then he breaks those 2 pillars and the whole building comes down and basically kills all the Philistines inside. And that was pretty cool. Onward to Ruth. Ruth gets a meh. She didn't do much. Actually, yeah, no, I'll keep her in meh. But she's like teetering between meh and good. She doesn't do a lot. But she is pretty loyal to her mom, who I think it's Ezra. I think that's her mom's name. But essentially her mom decides to like migrate back to Israel from Moab, and Ruth sticks with her the whole way, despite the fact that she would have a significantly better life back in Moab. So, you know, I'll give her credit for that, but other than that, she doesn't really do much. I think she ends up marrying a famous landowner in Israel, and then her family obviously gets rich and shit. Hannah gets a meh. She doesn't do anything except give birth to, I believe it's Samuel. Yeah, she essentially prays to God and she asks for a kid. And she's like, if you give me a kid, I'll promise I'll make him work in the church. And so she does, and that's how we get Samuel. Samuel's good. he was a pretty cool prophet. He worked with Saul, and I think it's Samuel who later in Saul's reign gets into, or no, Samuel gets to like come back as a ghost because I'll talk about that when I get to Saul. Eli gets bad. Eli sucks. He's known for literally nothing except for the fact that he didn't know how to punish his two children and let them run around and be spoiled and take advantage of people in the temple. Saul also gets bad. So essentially the Israelites were like begging God to give them a king. And so God ended up choosing Saul. Yeah, I think God had Samuel choose Saul. And Saul was a good king at first. But the problem is, later on down the line, he just completely went off the rails and started ignoring everything that he was supposed to do. Jonathan, that was Saul's son. I will give Jonathan... he's in a similar situation to Ruth, where he's like in between good and meh. Because like he doesn't really... I'm going to keep him in meh because he doesn't do a lot, but he does at least get some credit for treating David well, despite the fact that Saul wanted to kill David once he realized that David was chosen to be the next king. Now David, you might be thinking that I'm going to put David high up. They put David in God tier. I'm putting David all the way down in bad with Saul, because David, he starts out fantastic, right? He starts out absolutely amazing, right? He's a great king. He's killing like lions and bears with like his bare hands and shit to protect his sheep. He kills Goliath. Goliath also gets real bad just for being a giant cocky loser who gets one shot. Now, granted, he got one shot by the power of God, but still, he talked all that shit and got rocked by a pebble. But back to David, and the reason why I bumped him all the way down to bad, and that is because of Bathsheba. Now, for those of you that don't know the story of Bathsheba, long story short, David's like chilling in his castle, and he looks down and he sees some really good-looking girl taking a bath. And he's like, wow, she's gorgeous. And so he invites her to his palace, and he's like, hey, marry me or whatever. Problem is, Bathsheba has a husband. Now, what do you think David does? Do you think he, Actually, no, I'm not going to do the multiple choice thing. So what do you think David does? Do you think he took the normal, sensible option and decided, oh, she has a husband. I should just leave it alone. I have like 100 wives and concubines. And I could also have pretty much any single woman in the entirety of Israel. But no, David decides, you know what? No, I know what I'm going to do. And he sends her husband to the front lines of the military so that he'll die and she'll become a widow so that he can then marry her. What the fuck, David? You were supposed to be the good guy. You were supposed to be the good king. Saul was supposed to be the asshole, and you were supposed to be the cool guy. But you ended up being just as bad. So that's why I bumped David all the way down from where they had him at God tier, all the way down to bad. Solomon was... I'm going to give Solomon best of the best. He was top tier. He was a wise king. Everybody knows him for the story where... God was like, you can have anything you wanted, and instead of choosing riches or power or something like that, Solomon chose wisdom. Elijah, easy God tier. Elijah was so fucking cool. This man called down pillars of fire in arguments with people. He got into like, I don't know, he got into an argument with like priests from some other religion, and they tried to like summon rain and shit, and it didn't work, and Elijah just calls down a giant pillar of fire from the sky. That was fucking awesome. On top of which, Elijah is the only human on this list who just doesn't die. Elijah never died. Elijah was such a badass that instead of dying, a flaming chariot descended from heaven to pick him up and remove him from the mortal plane. That was fucking awesome. Elisha, easy best of the best. Now I think he was actually Elijah's disciple. I'm putting him in best of the best because Elisha was really funny. The story that everybody knows about Elisha is, aside from just being a great prophet, one time there were a bunch of kids, and I think they actually talk about this in their video. One time there was a bunch of kids, and they were essentially making fun of Elisha for being bald. And Elisha gets mad and calls down a curse upon them. And a bear comes out of nowhere and just mauls all these kids to death. And frankly, I don't blame him. Children are fucking annoying. On to Jezebel. I don't even remember much about her. I just remember that she's pretty much just known for being like a famous prostitute that pretty much like sleeps with all the kings and tries to get them to do evil shit. So I'm gonna just casually put her in bad. Ahab, meh, he doesn't really do much. Nehemiah, meh, doesn't really do much. I know he's a prophet, but I feel like there was one story that I saw in like VeggieTales or something back when I was a kid, but I don't remember what it was. Esther gets good. Esther was super cool. So Esther, Mordecai, and Haman are all in like the same story. So I'm gonna rank them all right now. Haman gets real bad. He was literally just racist. Mordecai gets meh because he doesn't do much. Although, well, no, I'll give him good because he helped raise Esther. But essentially, this whole story with Esther was, I think Haman just hates Jewish people because I think he was Persian, and so he was super racist. But the king was looking for girls from the kingdom, so he like ordered the best girls from the kingdom to be brought to him, and Esther was one of them. And essentially, Esther's just super nice, and I think she ends up becoming his favorite wife, and she ends up advocating for the Jews and getting them better treatment. So Haman hates this, and he keeps trying to conspire against Esther and Mordecai to get them killed or exiled or whatever. And he's so confident in himself that he orders gallows to be constructed because he's going to hang Mordecai. But then Esther comes along and exposes Haman, and they end up hanging him from those exact same gallows. So essentially, he just set up his own graveyard. Job, easy god tier. Job went through, I mean, there's not much to say. Job went through so much bad shit. He went through so much bad shit, and the fact that he made it through to the end, and he still somehow kept his faith is something else. Isaiah, I don't even remember much of what he did. Jeremiah, meh. He wrote a book named after himself, and then a book called Lamentations, which is just about like lamenting, which is just about like crying. Daniel, easy god tier. Daniel was so fucking cool. So Daniel's my boy. Daniel's known most commonly in the story of the Lion's Den, where essentially he pisses off this guy, King Nebuchadnezzar, who I'm going to put in bad because he's a total idiot. But essentially he pissed off... No, wait, he didn't piss off the Lions. Never mind, completely disregard that. Let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar first. So Nebuchadnezzar was a king at the time. And essentially he ordered a bunch of the Israelite boys to be brought to him because he wanted to make the best of them like stewards in his court or something. So he brings in Daniel as well as Daniel's friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who get an easy best of the best. I'll talk about that in a minute. But he brings them in, and then I think there's only one story where all of them are together, and it's just a story where the moral of the story is just eating vegetables every day, eating vegetables and water every day instead of, alcohol and greasy meat is healthier for you. That's the whole moral of that story. But Daniel, well, actually, you know what? Am I going to put Daniel in God tier? You know what? I'm actually going to bump him down to best of the best. Yeah, I'm much more comfortable putting him in best of the best. So Daniel's known mostly for he was great at interpreting dreams, and that was what he was super famous for. He interpreted dreams for Nebuchadnezzar, and eventually ended up. So funny story about Nebuchadnezzar. One of his dreams, essentially, as punishment for being a bad king, Daniel interpreted one of his dreams, and he was like, "If you don't repent, you're gonna get turned into a wild beast and sent into the wilderness." Obviously, he didn't repent, and that actually happened. For I forget, what was it, 7 years, something? Nebuchadnezzar's mind gets regressed to that of an animal, and he is just running around in fields naked, eating grass, until he decides to repent, and then he regains his sanity and returns to his place as king. But that was a really funny story. But back to Daniel, I keep getting super sidetracked. Daniel in the Lion's Den is probably the most popular kid story ever because it's awesome. Now, I forget exactly what king it was, but one of the kings that Daniel worked for, because he worked for a multitude of kings after Nebuchadnezzar. He worked for, I think, 2 or 3 kings after Nebuchadnezzar died. But essentially, there was this one king who, and he absolutely loved Daniel. Problem is, the king's other servants hated Daniel because he was better than all of them. So they got super jealous, and they essentially tricked the king into like issuing some decree that you weren't allowed to pray to anyone except the king. And since they knew that Daniel prayed like strictly at 3 times every day, they, like the day after that decree was issued, they ran into his house and found him, and they were like, "Gotcha!" And they dragged him off and ordered him to be thrown into a den like full of lions. And the next day, now unfortunately, you may be thinking, "Oh, well, if the king liked Daniel, why didn't he just undo it?" It was because I think the reason was like he gave it his like imperial seal or something, and so he couldn't overturn the edict. Daniel had to be punished. So the king was freaking out all night, and the next day he rushes down there, and they open up the lion's den expecting there to be just a gruesome, horrible scene. And Daniel's just fine. He's just chilling with all the lions. And he's like, "No, guys, I was good. I had faith in God, and an angel came and shut the lions' mouths." So that's Daniel, and that's why I'm putting him all the way up at best of the best. Now, let's talk about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because they got done so dirty in Charlie's tier list. He put them in meh, because he couldn't remember who they are, and that was what disappointed me the most. This story was my fucking childhood. So like I said, they were best friends with Daniel. But at some point, them and Daniel like split up. I think Daniel rose up, like he ended up being in a way higher position than them. But one of Nebuchadnezzar's dreams involved like a statue that was predicting the future kingdoms, and Daniel interpreted that. Nebuchadnezzar took that to mean, "Oh, I should build a giant golden statue of me and make people worship it." So that's what he did. He made a giant, massive golden statue and put it in the middle of the town. And he was like, "Whenever the trumpets sound during whatever hour, you have to drop whatever you're doing and worship my statue." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego obviously did not. And so they got punished, and they got dragged, I think, before Nebuchadnezzar. And he was like, "Apologize for what you did and bow right now." And they were like, "No thanks." And he got pissed. And so he arrested them and dragged them to a giant furnace. And they just kept pissing him off because they kept refusing to like bow down to his statue. And so he ordered them to turn the furnace up to like its maximum setting. And they made this furnace so hot that the guards that opened the door to push Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in just fucking died immediately from the heat. And this is where the story gets really cool. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are supposedly burning to ash in the furnace. Nebuchadnezzar and his crew are watching, and one of his attendants is like, "Hey, king, didn't we only throw 3 guys in there?" And Nebuchadnezzar was like, "Yes." And the attendant was like, "But why are there 4? And then they all freaked out because they immediately put together that that was like some angel of God. And so, they turned the furnace off, they opened it. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walk out completely unharmed. The Bible says that they don't even, at that point, they don't even smell like soot. And that's enough to shock everybody into like completely overturning their decisions. I think Nebuchadnezzar gets rid of the statue. He gets rid of the edict to bow down to it. And I think I'm not sure if he issues in like an official statement or anything, but he's essentially like, "Oh, you were right the whole time. Your God is the real one." Next up is Jonah. Everybody knows Jonah for getting swallowed by a whale. I'm going to put him in bad because, well, you know what? No, I'll put him in meh because I kind of understand why he ran away. Long story short, God told Jonah to go to like the worst city ever and try to, preach the gospel to them. And Jonah was like, "No thanks." Tried to run away on a boat, got eaten by a giant fish until he decided that he would actually go to the city after all. And that was the whole story. Initially, I was going to put him in bad for thinking that he could just run away from God. But at the same time, apparently that city really sucked. I don't actually remember what the city actually did, except for the fact that I remember in the VeggieTales movie about Jonah, the biggest problem was that the city slapped people with fish. And that was their great sin, and that was why Jonah didn't want to go there in the VeggieTales short. On to Mary. Mary, easy God tier. She went through some crazy shit because I think Mary was only like 15. So at 15 years old, have an angel descend upon you and be like, by the way, you're giving birth to the Son of God, and then just leave. That's some tough shit. But I mean, she persisted, and so I'll give her a God tier alone for that because that's some girl boss shit. Joseph, I'm gonna put in best of the best. Now let's talk about Joseph for a minute because in Charlie's video, they described Joseph as the first cuck. And I felt so bad for my man Joseph after hearing that, because they did him so dirty with that description. So for clarification, a lot of people don't actually know this, but when Mary went and told Joseph that she was pregnant with the child of God, Joseph had the exact same reaction anybody would have. And he was like, bullshit, and decided he was going to divorce her. Now this is where Joseph is elite. So normally the punishment for committing adultery, especially if you were a woman, back then was Joseph should have, according to the laws, dragged her out publicly, grabbed all his neighbors, and stoned her to death in the streets. But Joseph was like, no, I'm not going to do all that. I'm just going to secretly divorce you. We're not going to tell anybody why, and we're just going to go our separate ways. Now, ultimately, we know that didn't happen, and the reason for that is an actual angel had to come to Joseph and tell him that, yo, your wife wasn't lying. And that's how that got resolved. Jesus, I mean, that's an easy God tier. Literally. Mary Magdalene. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to put Mary Magdalene in meh. I cannot recall her doing much. I just remember that she followed Jesus around a lot. I know he drove like 7 demons out of her, and that was pretty cool. Zacharias, I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna put him in meh. His story was really boring. Now it took me the longest time to verify if I was thinking of the right story, because apparently Zachariah, because I always remembered his name as Zachariah, but apparently they mean the same thing. But his whole story is he's the father of John the Baptist, and the only really notable thing about him is that one time an angel came down to him and they were like, hey, instead of naming your child after yourself, name him John. And he was like, no. And so the angel muted him until he changed his mind. And that was really funny. Elizabeth, same exact here. She gives birth to John the Baptist. The only notable thing is that I think she was barren before. She couldn't give birth, and then the Lord just healed her, and she gave birth. She ended up giving birth to John the Baptist. John the Baptist, we'll put him in good, especially because I feel really bad for him, the way he went out. So John the Baptist isn't known for doing much other than obviously baptizing people, and he gets points for baptizing Jesus himself. But I feel really bad for how John the Baptist died. And for those of you that don't know, Herod, the next guy, who's obviously we're going to put into real bad, because this is also, I think this is the same Herod that tried to kill Jesus when Jesus was born. But essentially, Herod was throwing like a party or something, and his niece goes up to him and does like he gets seduced by his niece, basically. She does some sexy dance in front of her uncle for who fucking knows why. And he's like, wow, nice sexy dance, niece. I will give you anything in my kingdom. I'll give you up to half my entire kingdom. What do you want? Absolute idiot. Why would you even promise that? Even though it would have been funny if she took his entire kingdom. Instead, she was like, I want the head of John the Baptist on a platter. And so, yeah, that's how John the Baptist died. Because Herod got seduced by his niece. What the fuck? Peter gets a good, he's just a classic, well-known disciple. John, I'll put John in best of the best because he did write the book of... Now, this is not John the Baptist. This John is one of the 12 disciples. And apparently one of the most important ones, because the Bible just constantly refers to him as the disciple that Jesus loved. And he gets bonus points because John John wrote the book of Revelation. And so he got to see how the whole world is going to end. Judas, that's obvious. Real bad. He not only did he sell out Jesus, he sold out Jesus for like $20. I think it was at literally 20 pieces of silver. Pilate also gets bad. A lot of people might have put him higher than this because some people, there's this idea that like, oh, Pilate didn't want to kill Jesus just because he tried to give Jesus another chance. When he was at like the public assembly, he was like, "Hey, everybody, do you want to kill Jesus or do you want to kill this like evil rapist, murderer, thief guy?" And everybody chose the evil rapist, murderer, thief guy. And then Pilate was like, "Okay," and just ran with their decision. Now I'm pretty sure he could have overturned it if he wanted to, but clearly he didn't want to do it that badly. Stephen, he didn't do much. The only notable thing about him is I think he was, that's right. He's remembered as the first martyr because he got stoned to death. Paul, so this is the apostle Paul, whose name used to be Saul, not to be confused with King Saul. Good. I mean, he was a good apostle. He went around, he did a bunch of shit. Timothy was just Paul's disciple and was not as cool. Silas was just Timothy's fellow disciple, except significantly less relevant. Unlike Timothy, he didn't get his own book. I'm not going to rank the Antichrist and the false prophet because they allegedly don't even exist yet. I guess you could put them in real bad if I had to guess, since based off everything we're told, they're evil. And yeah, that's the end of the tier list. Follow me on Twitter. That'll be linked below. If you want to make your own tier list and tweet that at me, that'd be great. Make fun of me for my bad opinions. Also, follow me on Twitch. If you see this early enough, I will be live in a couple hours. Like and subscribe. Goodbye.